The Emperor says bring them to the amphitheater. Why do the guards feel sorry for them now? I assume Sonic and Tails aren't handcuffed or tied together so that they can't run or fly. So why doesn't Sonic just run away with Tails in tow instead of boring me with this lazy cliche part of the book that makes me want to check out of it? Of course they have to be gladiators. STC did this later, but this is the only time Tails has been involved. How did Tails think that the Emperor was ordering food for them at this point? At least all Sonic says is sorry to have to tell you before correcting him. They're faced with the challenge of gladiators with spears, and Sonic runs around in spin dashes and bounces off the wall to hit the royal bonk, splashing soda all over the Emperor's clothes. And he shoots into the sky with Tails close by. Sonic reveals he's capable of cartwheeling, which I think is a first, and goes into the lake beyond the woods. Tails follows him. It has the air bubbles from the games. And they hit an accelerator chute. The narration says the chute was at the lake bottom, which it already told us about. They go down a slide covered in slimy pondweed, so that's new. The narration calling the chute infamous is just an excuse for more padding, because it goes on to say that no one has ever heard of it because it's only been around for a few days. But that means it must have been magically created by the magic of the world itself, since its builder would have heard about it. I hope the fact that we were never told about anything telegraphing itself with already existing structures means that stuff can't be conjured up by the magic of the world if there's something already in the way. Otherwise, a lot of people would have been killed by loop-de-loops and corkscrews appearing in them, and that'd be a stressful world to live in. The story gets boring by over-describing what's just Sonic being sent down a slide that spirals like a roller coaster. Sonic thinks that because he got some rings, he can get past the robot fish he's heading for. But he heads past it by speeding past it instead. Tails stomps the robot and bounces out of the water through a maze entranceway and right into Sonic's back. So again, I have to assume he had rings that kept him from getting badly hurt. Sonic hits the water with a splash and hauls himself out to find Tails laughing behind a rock. It makes sense that he would want to laugh at the bully who kicked him without apologizing later. Sonic calls their adventure cool, and doesn't start apologizing. It goes over to Johnny Lightfoot for some padding, and explains that he likes to do sprinting. He's expected to run on a big hamster wheel while his brain's being scanned. The narration insults Tails by insisting that only Sonic would be able to foil Eggman's plans, even though Tails can do what he can. Eggman tells him repeatedly to go faster. During that time, he stalls by telling him he hates carrots and would rather have a burger and fries full of cheese and a double chocolate. He ends up deliberately losing his footing and spinning around the wheel. Sally calls Eggman a monster, and the story says she was always bossy and got most people to do as she said. Was Sally's personality always an inherent part of her character even before Zadiam? How did he guess this right? All I know for sure is that they did advertise the American cartoons in Sonic the Poster Mag, so maybe that's where the writer got this idea. Edgar leaves and comes back with a big hot deep pan pizza and cuts a slice to give Johnny. Out of nowhere, Sally whispers that she thinks Edgar's got feelings when I assumed it was all to bribe Johnny into running again. Realistically, Edgar had good hearing. He says Eggman's told him he's a brilliant psychologist who got an award. Sally tells him that's because he awards himself the awards for everything. Edgar doesn't want to believe her. It explains that Sally's trying to figure out an escape plan, even though she hopes Sonic and Tails will save her because she thinks of them as brave. The narration gives away that Eggman's hoping to learn about Sonic's powers by studying entirely the wrong people, somehow. Somehow, Sally takes him literally when she's called a guinea pig, and says that robots can't speak metaphorically based on an educational video. It was wrong then. Edgar wants to leave and think about this when he shouldn't. He should know that words can have multiple definitions. He was only speaking metaphorically because he was using the other definition of guinea pig. Why would robots only be able to use literal expressions if they know English, which is absolutely filled with other definitions based on metaphors? Edgar leaves, and Johnny and Chirps compliment Sally for confusing him. And it looks like it was a good thing only because she got alone with him so she could make a plan. Tails sees a dozen robot fish posted outside the maze's entrance, and he has a pessimistic worry afterwards that gets Sonic to sarcastically call him optimistic. And he once again complains that he thinks too much. Tails assumes that because the maze is new, it must be guarding the master computer terminal. Sonic jumps from excitement and hits his head and complains. Some more karma for being a bad friend. Tails looks at the ceiling and it looks weird enough that he wonders if it's a computer control system. Sonic spin dashes and reveals he can spin dash directly upwards if he tries hard enough. It makes as much sense than being able to spin dash at all. Every time he hits one of its panels, a robot comes out and there ends up being a swarm. The story knows to cut past them one-shotting them. And Sonic uses a bunch of complimentary adjectives for himself in a row that drags out his dialogue. But I see why he'd want to comfort himself here. The narration lampshade said it isn't like Sonic to get long-winded, and tries to explain that it's because his head's too full of a desire to get moving. It still doesn't really make it make sense. Tails says that because they've searched everywhere, the answer must be on the ceiling, even though Sonic already tried hitting the ceiling a lot. He quotes a smart person's logic for that, and Sonic stares at him with newfound admiration and says that he must be a genius and that he sounds brilliant. That's nice. It's too bad this doesn't get developed on because it's only accidentally stumbling to the truth, but doesn't think he's allowed to confirm it. They get behind a rock, and a huge Buzz-Downick robot flies to the ceiling and is conveniently here to enter the password in front of them. Somehow only Tails was smart enough to pay attention to which ones it pressed. He says the numbers belonging to the first 5. Somehow he figures out it's a good idea to change the numbers to what letter they correspond to and spell out Sonic. Tails says he's the second half of the code. Why would the password be a guessable bunch of predictable names instead of random nonsense? It shouldn't logically have a password. It just knows trying to access it and only allow robots through. Or at least have a password that's so long you wouldn't be able to learn it by watching. But it is great to see Tails be the smart one here. He could have easily just had Sonic be smart. Putting in the password, they figure out it doesn't work. Tails gets told he could stick his tails into the ceiling to plug themselves into the socket like the robot did. He's got the common sense to say he might burn himself that way. Surprisingly, he calls his tails his most gorgeous feature. Ideally, Sonic put that in his head. It's satisfying to see him say to Sonic, "And I thought you were my buddy," after this story. A deep voice says code accepted and asks for the purpose of transaction. Sonic doesn't know what transaction means. Wouldn't he have been the one buying his own groceries? He should know what it means. The voice repeats itself, this time sounding suspicious. If it's suspicious, I guess the only reason it doesn't forbid them access is that it assumes the delay is the heroes fighting the robot. Tails says direct data access in a panic and amazes Sonic, who calls him cool for it. Tails insists that he heard that in a video too. This implies that he would end up studying technology because he saw sci-fi, and this kind of stuff had it worked out. Sonic even tells him to keep watching videos like that, and gets followed into a huge place where they start falling. It looks like Chemical Plant Zone as a whole without pollution and full of computer terminals and robots to one-shot. I'm glad Sonic ends up saying, "What am I saying?" because he starts saying something silly after jokingly calling himself a squadron leader and Tails his wing pilot. After all, why should he take one-shottable robots seriously? It's not quite dark enough for that when someone competent facing them. The narration says that he knew that having a ring or two left gives him some protection. I like that because it's exactly how rings should work. For once he remembers that they do get protection, and isn't as overpowered as the early games by giving them the utmost protection. which explains why Sonic characters still get hurt but not enough. It sounds like Tails' adventure. Sonic eats some of the food in Tails' bag after working up an appetite. Sonic says the best way to start finding out which computer holds the location of the new lab is to start blasting them with a spin dash. Tails wanted to suggest a common sense, subtler approach, but wasn't fast enough to stop Sonic from starting to wreck the place. It was through sheer luck that Tails gets a chance to see the master computer. It says Sonic's having fun and activates a defense system full of spike balls, 2 of which crash into each other and break apart in midair. That seems new. He finds the exit panel and they leave. Sonic doesn't have the sense to notice that Tails' tail tips were slightly wagging, and thus he was only pretending they had failed. So I get to see him say he's one dumb hedgehog. Tails says he made a video of what was on the screen of the computer with their camera. That was cool of him. And he tries to take after Sonic by calling himself mega brilliant for using common sense when Tails is supposed to be humble. Meanwhile, Sally got the idea to stall for time by refusing to do anything to keep Eggman from getting info. I assume the reason the supposedly smart person is saying she's not a shrimp is that she's just taking any excuse to backtalk him in what's probably going to be a failed plan anyways. These pages are boring. She didn't get useful info out of him and went right back to refusing to press the lever. She says that if she lets herself starve, she won't be useful to Eggman, so he has to give her food anyways. She's told that if she doesn't press the levers when expected to, she'll be given food they hate, like cabbage boiled for a week, and hard Brussels sprouts, because Eggman planned for this. But that would just make them throw up. If it's a week old, you'd think it'd be rotten. Surprisingly, she gives in and agrees to eat the pizza. And now I really don't see the point of Eggman having an experiment that gives people delicious food. Both of these scenes seem like a waste of time. Eggman says he might need to use an encouragement machine on Sally, but Eggman says he doesn't have time because he knows Sonic entered the master computer system. So that's competent. He says they have to activate their defenses and have their first subject ready to go into the machine by tomorrow morning, and he picks Sally because she was being difficult. Edgar points out that the machine has to have brain scan info and it didn't get any from her. Eggman gets mad at being contradicted, so at first I thought he'd just leave it at that. He says they'll use a ray to shapeshift her to get around that. I'm impressed they just happened to have that already. I thought he was going to insist on using Sally when he should think it's just a bad idea to have a lazy way of forcing him to fail. I thought he got the idiot bull, but now that doesn't seem as likely. Sally finds out from Egor that she can't get pizza when she's supposed to be asleep. Out of nowhere, Egor looks sad because she complains about Eggman's plan for her. So he inexplicably gives her a slice of pizza. This is like a prototype of Gamma, but without the animal trapped inside him to appeal to, I assume. Logically, there would be an animal in him because that's how Eggman's robots usually were back then. And so it was weird that there weren't animals in his robot Sonics. I guess there just wasn't any room for them. Sadly, Tails can't make sense of the computer code. Sonic says they should go to Metropolis to find out where the new lab is using the master lab there. Somehow, Tails thinks it's a bad idea because they'll have to get past the same challenges they already got past in the games effortlessly. He did have a good point that it'll take a lot of time when he misses their friends. Sonic gets the idea to take their camera to someone he knows called Mickey. Every time Sonic knows to go to someone for help that he knew but the audience didn't, it feels unsatisfying because it came out of nowhere. Tails says the monkeys of Emerald Hill can be evil. Sonic calls him stupid and says that all this hero stuff is playing havoc with his eating habits for no reason. They find Mickey, and Tails wastes time complaining in a whisper about his dated slang. Mickey's reminding me of Marine. Sonic tells him to give him the film, and he sits in front of computers in a beach hut. Tails is surprised by Emerald Hill Zone having electricity, and gets told someone living here laid a power cable to one of Eggman's terminals. It's nice that people benefit from him here. It's annoying that Tails is wasting time whispering about how he talks while Sonic's the one with common sense. The story sure takes its time with a bunch of worthless words. Eventually they find out that Eggman's secret lab is in Scrap Brain Zone, which I wouldn't expect because Sonic had already been there. So if he had just started randomly guessing where his secret lab was from the start, he would have gone to the lab a lot faster. It's in such an obvious place and it makes sense that they thought he knew better. The only way it could be any more obvious is if it was in Metropolis. It's not like Tails to be unhappy that he won't have places to hide and dodge. Sonic reminds Tails of what's wrong with Scrap Brain while not taking it seriously. He sarcastically thanks Mickey for reminding them of the other problems with it that regular people know about. I guess the people freed from badniks there spread the word. The story keeps wasting time, with the excuse that Mickey doesn't want to tell them more of the truth because it's depressing, unless it gets bribed with some more food. Sonic gets to complain about it. Mickey wastes even more time by lying that the bad news is his birthday and he didn't get a gift before he gives them the real bad news. He tells them Eggman's working on a secret weapon. All of his mechas are weapons in a way. This isn't helpful. The story is even more boring padding, not worth mentioning for a while, until Tails thanks him for the help and finally says that he doesn't talk cool. Too bad the chapter doesn't end there in favor of wasting even more time on him talking. Mickey says in a needlessly wordy way that that's just how everyone talks where he lives. Tails thanks him again, and eventually goes on to another villain scene, with a paragraph so huge it's like the editor didn't do his job. This is seriously boring to read. Why is it important that Eggman's in a lab coat? He's never using chemicals. It says Eggman's never late or early, and even brushes his teeth and stuff at the exact same times every day. The narration even talks like Eggman does for a little bit as it recaps to me. Edgar continues to confuse me, talking like it matters that Sally has a high temperature out of nowhere and expects me to believe that a fault with the machinery from lever overuse would cause a fever. He says the food delivery system was overactive and she ate too much pizza. So it's just Johnny instead. I thought Eggman was going to be the one saying how dare you, because that would keep him in character with how he was before by overreacting to him having independent thought. Instead it's Johnny. Sally wonders why Eggman's lying to spare her from the machine. I don't know why either. Why would the most annoying kidnapping victim here become the only one he cares about? The story gets boring again with a bunch of worthless words, mostly from Eggman bragging to them about stuff I already know. At least in Archie Sonic, most of the wordiness was in narration boxes, so you knew you could skip it with no consequences. And the stories were more creative than this. He says the Far Out machine is a shapeshift array. It's pretty underwhelming that it's just something I already saw a million times in Sonic Underground. Although that came out after this. It's still the first time Eggman made it. Why does Eggman say he only plans to try to capture and shapeshift Sonic after he expires from running around too much? Something he shouldn't assume would happen. All Eggman would have to do is use the shapeshift array in Sonic and he'd win. Maybe the shapeshift array in Underground only worked on Dingo. That must have been what I assumed to not ask why Sleet never fired it at Sonic. Eggman says that Sonic had been threatening his plans for world conquest. I thought he had already taken over the world. Because he put the emeralds in space, and they're the source of his power. Why doesn't he already crown himself king? He gets insulted by Joe Sushi, the original inspiration for Rotor. He tells him he'll find himself killed if he dares to talk to him like that. But he just did, so why doesn't he do it already? Why does the story take so long to have Johnny get shapeshifted? Nobody cares what the machine looks like. I was just picturing it as a laundry machine. What is so hard about just saying, Eggman put Johnny inside the machine and pressed the button, and in seconds he was shapeshifted? Nobody should be allowed to write kids' books this way. You won't believe how long it takes to get through this. I can't imagine any kid reading all of this. The chapter ends and goes to Sonic without explaining what Johnny was turned into. Sadly, the next chapter doesn't just start with Sonic already at the end of Scrap Brain Zone. Even though we already know from Sonic 1 what it's like, and Sonic and Mickey already recapped everything wrong with it. So this is so boring. It should have been a place with a new name so I'd be surprised by what it has. The narration says Scrap Brain Zone is where Eggman dumps all of his junk from his failed experiments. The only experiment he fails at is trying to kill Sonic. I'm told that there's rusted, broken robots all over the place. I thought the appeal of the final zone in these games was to show Eggman's competence. Some crawler robots grab Tails out of the shell of a broken robot with antenna twitching, and Sonic has to effortlessly save Tails from it. That seems new. He tells him to be careful and not check out any broken robots closely. It was clever of the robots to hide in a broken one. It's creative that crawlers are here, instead of just Balrogs and counter-killers. It goes over to Eggman's scene. It says the experiment was a failure. The narration points out that Eggman's usually short-tempered and violent, which draws attention to it being confusing that he's not acting this way about the experiment being unsuccessful. Why did Igor not know what a pilot study was? He knows how to talk, which means all of English was downloaded into him. It turns out they didn't even turn Johnny into a very simple machine, because he didn't have a very advanced brain. So then why didn't Igor choose Porker? Why didn't Eggman force him to choose Porker? Why does he think the solution is to use the squirrel? Eggman says they need to wait for the shapeshifter ray to recharge, so they have to wait until tomorrow to use it on Sally. So all things considered, it's a lot lamer than a roboticizer right now. Which is what I've been thinking of it as. Because why wouldn't he use it as one? Something that turns someone into a bipedal robot is going to be a lot more useful because there's a lot more things they could do with legs and hands. Why would a technology-focused roboticist shapeshift most people into anything other than robots? Porker says it's gross that a robot's cleaning and polishing the floor with what used to be Johnny. I wonder if they're going to keep him this way the whole book. They thought they were allowed to kill him off at the end of the original Sonic the Comic, even though he was a Sega character because he was the rabbit in Sonic 1 and originally looked like him in the issues. And they got no consequences from it as far as I know. I guess it's because it had been long enough since Sonic 1, so Sega forgot Johnny's origin. The story wastes my time with Sally's friends being scared. I originally thought that the reason the mop had a stumpy tail at the far end of the handle was because Sally was hiding the mop part of it so she can escape. But that brings up the question of how did she even escape her cage? Why is Porker the only one who had heard that they're going to be shapeshifted tomorrow? All of them are in the same room. And it's always been Sally who stayed up long enough to eavesdrop on Eggman. Why isn't she the one saying this? Rhoda wonders if Johnny's mind is inside that mop. And Sally says it must be because otherwise they wouldn't have bothered to scan their brains. Naturally, Tux wonders if it would even be a good thing to have your consciousness intact while you're shapeshifted into a mop or something. I don't understand how Johnny could be turned into something that's completely shaped differently from what it was supposed to be. The excuse for it doesn't make any sense. If the story knows it's unnecessary for Sonic to say he's in front of the entrance door, there's no excuse for the story being padded out even more with him saying so. It is new that there even is a steel hatch door in this place that Sonic has to push a glowing red panel on the side of it to open. Why don't they just have doorknobs so that if there's a blackout, it's still possible to use the door? The narration said before this that they don't have much time because there's buzzing robots after them. So why are they wasting time talking instead of just running to the hallway they got access to? Nothing that seems creative or actually tense happens after this. I haven't memorized the names of every badnik ever because I'm not that much of a nerd. So I'd have no idea if this book was creative with the placement of badniks in zones. So it's not creative enough, especially since it doesn't really affect the story either way because they usually all try to attack the same and get killed the same. Sonic somersaults into the red panel to make the next door open. This may be the first time he did a somersault, and I have to assume it was just to show off. And since he's cocky in the games, it just naturally would lead to him wanting to show off occasionally. So I don't know why anyone ever complained about realistic outcomes like this in anything, as long as he's not being annoying. I wonder if any of the 6 trillion words describing what they see after this will actually be plot relevant. This is really making me want to check out. Unless they're in danger because of something in the room, I don't care. Stuff like this makes me think that reading every word of these Sonic novels is going to be the hardest task I ever accomplished going through the series. It's not interesting until Sonic knocks over a door to the recharging plant, but is left bouncing uncontrollably off the ceiling, walls, and floors until he hits a lever he's not supposed to touch while the far-out machine's recharging. Sonic and Tails get bathed in a green ray and forced to spin, and alarms and a slurp is heard. And then the light goes out for the most part, and they black out. It goes over to the next page where Edgar has a believable excuse for why he still thinks it's right to shapeshift Sally. He thinks her and her friends cause Eggman trouble, but once they're shapeshifted, they'll lead productive lives as a result. Edgar says Sonic and Tails are next for the machine, and Eggman has enough scientific data to be able to shapeshift them too, even though he didn't scan their brains. I guess he scans their brains while they're being shapeshifted. He must have upgraded it. He thinks everyone will be happy under Eggman's rule, and thankfully the narration explains this as a loyalty program. Sally asks him if he'd be happy being used as a mop, and says they were happy before they were kidnapped. Edgar is silent to this for a minute somehow, before he says it's for the greater good, and Sally tells him that Eggman pollutes. This whole conversation is only going to be worthwhile to write if it leads to something. It doesn't. Edgar says he's not programmed to discuss environmental issues just because he's a robot, but makes the excuse that at least he improves the environment by cleaning out a smelly cage, even though her cage was unusually clean because of Sally. Then why would he say this when he's not blind? He somehow decides to try to clean the cage anyways, lifting the bars out on one side, and then alarms and flashing lights happen because Sonic's in the assembly plant. Eggman says the door to the shapeshifting chamber is stuck, so he can't capture Sonic. He's too late reaching for the lever and complains that Sonic's gone into the recharging room. Sally slips the grill off of the front of the air conditioning duct, and conveniently, the bolts were loose for no reason in Eggman's lab, so she's able to slip into the air duct and clip the grill back into place behind her. Mythbusters proved that sneaking through an air duct is really loud because you make noise every time you move in it, since it's made of metal, not carpet. There is an alarm going off, so that would cover up the sound. Also, I assume she looks like the small animal from Sonic 1, so it also makes sense that she could fit in the air duct. It fortunately explains that she doesn't feel good about leaving her friends behind, and that she isn't strong enough to remove the bars off their cages. Meanwhile, Tails eventually figures out he's in a Sonic 1 special stage alone, and is of course in character by worrying about it because he has to face this alone, and he's worrying that Sonic might have gotten destroyed by that trap. Eggman says Sonic destroyed recharging batteries, but that ends up a waste of our time, because Edgar tells him the reserve batteries will be finished by tomorrow anyways. Eggman wants to learn the secret of Sonic's speed. Long before they issue an SDC, long before that movie. It's a brilliant idea of him, and it required the writer to actually think about Sonic and the Sonic vs. Eggman dynamic. To consider what other goals Eggman would realistically have than just wanting to kill Sonic. Eggman calls Edgar splendid. That's good for Edgar's sake. But I don't think Eggman should be written to compliment anyone without a benefit to himself being clear. Especially considering that he's evil because he absorbed all the world's evil. So they're just lucky he wanted to be a world conqueror instead of a serial killer. I suppose it's because it just built off his already there desire to improve the world. He also calls him good robot before we get to see him see the open cage, but doesn't say his reaction. Oh well. Tails felt like he had been spinning around for hours. How did he stay in a Sonic 1 special stage that long? So he was so insecure about his ability to not get kicked out of it that he stayed in a place where he'd stay there no matter how much it spun around. Sonic should have told him what this place was like, so he'd already know there was nothing actually harmful about this place. So why not try to finish it? To be fair, Sonic also would have told him the special stages are different every adventure, so it would be reasonable to assume that this is secretly a new special stage that does have lethal stuff, like the bombs in the half-pipe stage. Tails hears a whoosh and lands on the sand of a beach near Mickey of all people. You're supposed to be sent out of the special stage right back where you just were. What determines where someone gets sent out of it if it's not that? It seems like plot convenience. Eventually it gets revealed that Sonic had been turned into a toaster for now. But Tails was bathed in a green ray as well. So, Tails got lucky. So he collected an invisible ring at just the right moment and summoned a giant ring to send him into a special stage. Mickey figures out what happened to Sonic and is smart enough to make waffles with him. Tails calls him out on it and gets told it's what he would have wanted, ain't it? I mean, did you just want him to keep lying around, doing nothing at all? And Tails says no and reluctantly drops it. I love that it's treated seriously by Tails while Mickey's adding humor to the situation that's supposed to make sense because of who he is. I mean, Sonic got turned into a toaster of all things. It's still dark, so it makes sense that Tails is taking it seriously. But the sheer silliness of what he was turned into, it sort of justifies the dissonant comedy. Tails tries to risk his life by asking him to go to Scrap Brain Zone with him. Mickey points out that he gets out of shape running 20 meters, so he'd only slow him down. Tails asks how many waffles he put in him, and gets annoyed at his condescension because it reminds him of Eggman. Mickey even called himself a genius. That's not good because it could discourage Tails from going in that direction, but maybe he didn't mean that kind of genius. Tails points out that one of the waffles hadn't come out, and Sonic had cooked waffles without being plugged in. And then when he is, some more waffles vanish. Mickey asks Tails what's Sonic's most prominent characteristic. Somehow he meant that it's his supersonic metabolism. So he was wrong to call Tails slow. He says the fact that the waffles are getting eaten up means there's still Sonic in there. But not literally, as he finds out. It's kind of funny that Mickey looks in the toaster slot and says, "Only a few crumbs." I don't think there's a miniature hedgehog running around trapped inside there. Because it made me picture that. Then he gets the idea to try to feed 200 waffle packs to Sonic. That sure is desperation. What else can they do than the one thing that doesn't act like himself? It's such a crazy idea that it makes sense that it wasn't Tails who thought of it. Meanwhile, the story wastes my time with Sally doing nothing interesting. While the writer pads out the novel, describing things that nobody needs or wants described. It explains in past tense that Sally defeated a few badniks by tripping and having one run into her feet as they fell up, which kicked one into the other. First off, this should have happened in present tense to make the boring air duct stuff exciting, because I really don't know if she's going to succeed or not. And second, it's sad that even this version of Sally got to fight robots successfully before Sadie and Sally did. I'm so bored I can't focus on this one continuity. It was smart of Sally to take a long steel pin out of the badnik remains so she might prise open a grill. At first she despairs because she doesn't know which way to go, but cheers herself up because she remembers her friends need her. She then follows the smell of rotten eggs through the air duct. The story could have not had this scene and it'd make just as much sense to me. I think she just went through the only path the air duct had to get to the right place. I didn't expect to get to see more of Sally being a brave hero though, and she's actually impressed me more here than most of the Sadie M books. Meanwhile, the next scene drags out when I already knew what Mickey's plan was. Mickey tells Sonic that if he can understand what he's saying, he should shoot out the right-hand waffle when he puts it in, and he generously says he can eat the other one. The experiment works twice. It was smart of him to try it again just in case. The waffles must be magically turned into energy right away when they disappear. I know you can't finish a waffle that fast. They always go cold before you're done. Mickey makes light of the situation again by saying they have the world's first toast hog, which sounds better than Hedger, as he points out. And Tails calls him out. Like a scientist, he makes sure to do another experiment by giving Sonic the instruction to shoot out one waffle from the left side and one from the right side, to prove that he indeed could understand him and it wasn't just coincidence. He used up a huge amount of waffles on a letter code. Mickey says Sonic's been talking to him. Or rather, waffling actually. It's cute that it says Tails tapped his foot like he'd seen Sonic do. I don't think I've seen Tails do that before. And it justifies that happening in the narration as I'm imitating Sonic. Mickey tells him that he can't help having a sense of humor. And somehow he figured out what Sonic wanted to tell him. He talks as if Sonic had really been talking to him. but it would probably take a lot more than 128 packets of waffles to see what he did, when he only has 2 slots to work with. I guess how it worked was that Mickey went through the letters of the alphabet at a slow enough speed to be fair, and he signaled him when he got to the right one. But what Sonic was trying to tell Tails was that he has to take him back to Eggman's lab to figure out how to reverse what happened. Anyone could have assumed that was what he needed to do. Then Tails is told that Sonic could put the same energy he used to put into his super spins to make himself fire out toast or something. So Tails could use him as a waffle gun, and even blast down the door that was in their way last time with a fragile little waffle alone. That's certainly magical, alright. Even a burnt waffle you'd think would just crumble from that. Why is Tails getting mad at him for saying he can't risk unplugging into the mains while talking as if he said he could? Mickey says to try a battery and hooks the connectors he conveniently had for no reason up to the toaster and sticks waffles in it. The waffles go ridiculously far away. Mickey says he'll make something else for him, and Tails ends up with a huge bandolier of waffles around his neck that fades into a feeder tray that triggers him into Sonic when Tails pulls a lever on the side of it. Apparently he really can make things. Of course, I would have been happier if Tails made this, but the writer had no way of knowing. Realistically, the weight of the stuff slows Tails down, and he missed having someone to have a conversation with. And he knew better than to waste waffles on talking to Sonic. Tails hadn't brought his camera with him because it would have been extra weight. A robot's metal back splits apart to reveal a rocket, and Tails narrowly avoids it. The story insists that he was concussed from the blast, but he doesn't act like he has a concussion the rest of the book. So he must have gotten rings that healed him. I guess the soot came from the missile damaging the floor. Tails uses the waffle gun successfully against the robots, knocks down 2 factory doors, and the scene ends. I wish it was described as fast as I did it. Meanwhile, Sally hears Eggman waste her time and then plan on putting Eggman in an analyzer to make sure none of his weird previous behavior returns. Eggman says he transformed Sally's friends. She takes the risk of hoping that Eggman's noise would cover up the noise of her forcing the grill off the wall. And it's cool for her to plan on hitting Eggman over the head with it. If she was in Sad AM, she would have killed Eggman in just a few episodes. The far door to Eggman's office disintegrated because of a stream of waffles. She wonders if she's hallucinating because, yeah, waffles couldn't blow down a steel door. Tails threatens Eggman, with Sally somehow thinking that it doesn't sound much like his voice. But he finds out he's out of waffles. I'm glad that's the excuse for his failure. At first I read ahead and thought that Eggman had gotten the chance to send a paralyzing beam at him because Tails hadn't shot him fast enough. Tails gets bathed in a blue beam of light, and Eggman pulls a lever to overload. Why is it blue instead of green? Tails slowly starts changing into a coffee percolator with 2 handles. Eggman's being a lot more creative than just turning people into robots of the same shape as before, but that would have been a lot more useful to him. I assume he plans on roboticizing normal people, and it's just reserving the most lame and insulting transformations for his worst enemies out of his sadism. Sally throws the grill at the back of Eggman's head, sending him reeling sideways. Sally somehow fails to jump into him and goes skidding along the work table, which hits the lever and knocks it into reverse. She hits her head on the floor, and somehow that alone knocks her out. Sonic wakes her up with a rotten egg that was somehow near her. Of course, Sonic and Tails are back to normal. Sonic says Eggman ran away. And now, for the sake of being generous, I have to assume that despite being hit on the back of the head with an air duct entrance, Eggman had the time to get up and run away, and ran through some invisible rings that started healing him. Because Sonic and Tails just took that long to return to normal.